You're tuning into the High Performance Path podcast, and I'm your host, Alex. If you want to increase your productivity, enhance your mental performance, hack your sleep, and build a bulletproof body, then you're in the right place. Get ready as we dive into interviews with performance coaches, business owners, and health professionals to find out their daily routines, habits, and movement practices. All right, let's go. All right, guys, we're back. Jacob's on the show for round number 2. Now, before we get stuck into it, you've had a pretty significant life event happen in between our last recording and this recording. You've actually become a dad. So how's that been?
Oh, mate, it's incredible. It's one thing everyone tells you that it's like life-changing and how special it is, and like I think you get it until it actually happens, and then you finally get it, and it's been awesome. We've been very, very fortunate. I've still been getting plenty of sleep. Millie's been really, really good, and Jess has taken naturally to being a mother really, really well. So I'm very, very lucky and very grateful, and yeah, it's been very special, particularly having the extra time at home, given the whole recent situation with COVID. That I think I've had more of a luxury than most young dads get to. A lot of guys have to go back to work pretty quickly, and I've been able to have a little bit more time at home with the family, which has been a great time.
That's awesome. It's good to hear about the sleep as well. That's pretty lucky that you've managed to still get a lot of sleep. So she's been sleeping through the night?
Yeah, mate. She's I think we've had 3 nights in like nearly 16 weeks. Oh, she'd be 16 weeks old now. So 3 nights in 16 weeks where we've actually had like interrupted sleep.
Yeah, well, that's good, man. Exciting things. Now, today's episode that we're going to be talking about, the gyms have just opened up, restrictions are easing off, and I know a lot of people are very eager and very keen to jump back into training. So we're going to talk about things that you need to consider before jumping back into training. Now, you're either one of two people. You've had access to all your normal equipment and your training hasn't really changed much, which is a very small percent of the population. Majority of the people listening would have had a significant change in their training, whether that's total volume or equipment used or style of training. So we're going to talk about the things you need to consider before going back to whatever style of training that is.
I'm excited, man. This is going to be good.
So the first thing that we're going to dive into, or the first thing that you need to consider is your goals. Your goals may have changed slightly. You may have realized certain things during the last 12 weeks or however long lockdown was. How long was it? Do you know exactly how many weeks?
I think we were close to 12 weeks now.
About 12 weeks, so a good 3 months. Your goals may have changed slightly. So that's the first thing you need to consider. Are your old goals still going to be the same now? So have yours changed anything? Have yours changed through anything that you've realized through this isolation?
Yeah, man. Like, so for me, like, obviously it's a big change. Like last time I was on the show, we were talking about, we were, I think, 4 weeks out of me going down to the Arnold Strongman event, which is, as we said there, the biggest competition of the year. So like I was in like full prep mode, like every meal's dialed, every training session's dialed down to what weight you're expected to lift going in, and things were pretty serious at that point. But obviously, a week after we were on the episode, Millie came along. That definitely tested out the ability to balance all these things, and then a lot of the competitions have then been cancelled. And kind of strongman's one of those sports that I was basically competing about every 8 weeks. So it was like you'd finish one, you might take like a little bit of general training and then straight back into specific events to build on to the next one. For me, I kind of lost the drive to go into the competitive side of stuff, and given that I've got the family now, I really want to just get back to training for the fun of it. I'd started taking up a few things that, like doing sprint training, a bit of old like footy style conditioning and stuff, and I was like, man, I really miss this. Like, why haven't I been doing this for all this time? And I was like, well, it was mainly because I was like, well, it doesn't fit the strongman plan, and which is all fair when it's comp prep, but at the same time, it's like you still have to enjoy every bit of your training.
And still gotta love it.
Yeah, and if there's something that you love but it's not exactly fit to like that main goal, doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just might mean that you just have to scale how much you do it.
Mm.
So that was the thing for me, is like I decided, I was like, for me, I don't need to compete for a little while now. I'm gonna just take a bit of time where I'm focused on family, where I'm focused on the business, and where I train for the enjoyment again. And I'm sure I'll come back, and like I'm sure as soon as the comps start again, that I'll get that fire back, and I'll want to be out there, and I'll want to be doing my best on there. But for right now, it's like I want to enjoy the other stuff to do with activity. I want to get back out on my mountain bike again. I want to go and be able to go and play with Millie, and if go and play a game of OzTag or something like that. So I guess the active lifestyle has really became more of a focus, and how can my training complement that rather than dictating what I can and what I can't do.
Yeah, cool. Now, I think for me, a big goal or focus of my training is staying injury free, just based off injuries I've had in the past. I value being injury free a lot. So that hasn't really changed in terms of all this. This has actually been a good chance to drop the intensity right back and kind of start in a really fresh, recovered kind of state, which we'll dive into a little bit later about if that is the case. But yeah, for me, my goals haven't really changed. But I think
What about how you go about that? Like in terms of like, I know you've been doing a bit of like trail running stuff like that. Is that stuff that you were always doing, or is that stuff that you picked up in the COVID
well,
period?
I mean, I'm a dabbler. I like to try as many different things and kind of dabble in everything. And so, I mean, this was a chance for me to go on trail runs more often and do things outside of the gym, which I always try to balance gym time with stuff outside of the gym as well. And that's typically the weekends for me. Every weekend, I do a trail run or a run. Like I enjoy park run quite often. I'll try and get to maybe one of those a month. And the weekends is when if I do work out on the weekends, it's usually outside or something like a bike ride on Fernley Track or something, just because I enjoy being outside, and it's a good balance between being inside of the gym and getting fitter and being outside and playing sport as well. So sport, I think, is important as well.
I think that's
For a
something that a
number of
lot of
reasons.
people would have got in this time. I think a lot of people would have started to appreciate that side of things more, the way that your outlook on it is.
And I mean, it's been great because I have been trail running more and doing more stuff outside of the gym, which I kind of always valued that anyway. But I mean, this was an opportunity to do more of that. But yeah, I think people that rely heavily on gym for fitness would have struggled, because if you use a lot of machines in your fitness regime and now you don't have a lot of machines, if you don't understand the basics of like anatomy and muscle insertion points and how to kind of train specific muscles, if you don't understand that and you just rely on a machine, then you don't really know how to train those muscles. So I think for a lot of people that did rely on machines and stuff, hopefully they've realized the benefits of functional movement and realize that you can do a lot without machines. And so I think a lot of goals for people in that scenario would be to like maybe go back to a gym, but instead of using so many machines, maybe go to the free weights or the kettlebells and dumbbells and kind of incorporate those more, so that you are less reliant on a gym for fitness, and that then opens up a lot. I mean, free weights have a lot of benefits over machines. Machines definitely have their place, but hopefully this has kind of opened up a lot of people's perspectives to fitness and health, I guess, and training.
Yeah, how can you become like a student of training and like get to understanding it so in that way, rather than it being like, okay, cool, I just do these exercises in these sets and reps and that's how I get the result. It's like, okay, well, what happens? How do we manipulate those? Like if we've got a constraint that there isn't, like what happens if a leg press is taken for the next like half an hour because the dude's taken forever on there? What can you do that's going to get you the same stimulus and get you the same result, but you don't have to sit around and wait half an hour for old mate that's texting on his phone or watching YouTube videos in between every set. I think it's definitely a good opportunity. It's like if you've noticed that those things, like you were very constrained by the situation, it's like now when you come back in is how do you set yourself up so that like if we have a second outbreak, which like I really, really hope doesn't happen and we all get shut down again, is like touch wood, yeah. Like how can you not have those same constraints next time around? How can we use this time to prepare yourself to succeed in the long run with it?
Yeah, so considering goals, that's what you need to do. One of the first things you need to do. Do you want to add anything else about goals?
No, I think it's just take that time to have a bit of reflection in it. Like, I know some people have come back to me in conversations. It's like, hey, you know what? This like I thought this was what I wanted, but it was probably because it was like everyone else telling me I want that. When they had a bit of a chance for themselves and go, hey, you know what? Like, running distance isn't for me, or like lifting heavy all the time isn't for me. And I think now's a really, really good time to think about it before you step back foot in the gym and you're back on the loop of like, you're just following what everyone else is doing or following the class again.
So let's move on to the training.
Oh, the fun stuff.
So what actual training are you going to start to do? Are you going to continue doing the same style of training that you did before? Maybe you were doing powerlifting, maybe you're doing CrossFit, maybe you were doing just bodybuilding. Are you going to continue doing the same style of training or something different? So the first thing I would consider, now you're either doing your own programming and choosing what you do in the gym, or a lot of people might be going to a gym and is just going to be doing the class and doesn't really have, and you don't have that much say in what training you do. So if you're doing your own training and you have a say in what you're going to train, I would recommend, for me, I would start with something that's low intensity and kind of ease back in. Something like bodybuilding or hypertrophy, I think would be perfect for a number of reasons. It's generally lower intensity than your powerlifting or your CrossFit. So it's going to be good to start with something lower intensity. Also, over the last 3 months, if you've been training a lot less, or if you've been training but with less weight potentially because you don't have many weights at home, potentially you've lost some muscle mass compared to what you had at the start of COVID. So adding on some muscle mass can be really beneficial, and this can be the perfect time to do that because it's just a really good way to start a cycle, starting with more muscle mass. No matter what your goals are, there's nearly no downside to having more muscle mass, unless, for example, you're in a sport where you've got to fit in a specific weight range and too much muscle will mean you're too heavy or you might be too bulky for whatever reason. But
and even there, like very often a lot of those sports, the person with the most muscle under that weight class kind of wins.
Yeah.
Like it's with the weightlifting's probably the only exception, but once you get to the highest level, it's not far off that anyway. But the Chinese dudes are always the most jacked and they always win.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing is just evening out imbalances. So there's so many benefits of bodybuilding, and we're not going to dive into all the benefits of this in this episode. But starting off with bodybuilding can just kind of bring you back to hopefully any muscle mass that you have lost, start to regain that. And it's also, I would say it's smart to start with that, something that's low intensity to ease back in. Also, it'll kind of give you a chance to build back your habits and your food and kind of build back a routine and stuff like that. I would combine that hypertrophy training with some low intensity aerobic kind of training to, again, you've probably lost some fitness over the last 12 weeks. So I would keep the intensity low and start to add some aerobic conditioning in to build back that base that you may have lost before ramping it up into some high intensity stuff. What about yourself? Would you add anything onto that, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, so this is obviously me being a gym owner, and this is what I do. Is like this is very much in the same lane of like what we've been going through in the last couple of weeks. Is like how do we bring this back into the gym? And typically, as you said, is like it's the best way to start a training block with something that's a little bit more hypertrophy focused, a little bit more multiplanar. Is like how can we challenge the body and like build a bit of efficiency in a bunch of planes of movement. It's like so you've got your lunges, your squats, your hinging. You've got multiple variations, whether that's like single arm, single leg, doing them with different planes like a Arnold press versus a straight shoulder press. And you're really, really building a solid movement foundation first. And particularly in this time too, is like from a physiology perspective, one of the biggest reasons why people get injured is because their volume that their muscles and their nervous system can produce in terms of workload exceeds what their connective tissue can recover from. And I know this firsthand. I've beaten up nearly everything at some point. I've been doing this for a while now, and for that to happen, or for us to avoid those injuries, rather, we need to spend some time working on that connective tissue. Unfortunately, connective tissue takes a long time to build, and you need to be doing it with some load, obviously, but at a reasonable load rather than overloading it. So I think when we're looking at things like the bodybuilding work, it's perfect, particularly if we're going to take joints through a full range of motion. So we're going to get to those weaker spots. We're going to learn how to control those positions there. We're going to load those tendons, the ligaments up in a bunch of ways that is going to actually help you build longevity, not necessarily like force yourself into injury. And alongside that, as we talk a lot about phase potentiation here, is how can we take this training block that you're doing currently and then build upon that so that the next training block is going to be complemented by the last one rather than doing something completely different. And everyone likes like variety, which is great, but variety within some sort of purpose, so it builds one upon the next, is how you get great results in the gym rather than just good results in the gym. So I think the foundation for a lot of that comes down to that hypertrophy piece. So I'm definitely with you on that one. And particularly when if you do like I really want to pull a heavy deadlift right now, but I know it's not the smart thing to do. Like I haven't touched anything over 180 in quite a long time. And I'm like, cool, like I should just grab one of these bars out right now and just give it a crack. But I also know there's like, it's how I'm going to probably get hurt if I overload those connective tissue. And then two, the other piece is like neurally, you need to build efficiency first before you can produce that high threshold movement or that like high load movement like a deadlift. So if I jumped into it now, my timing's going to be off, my efficiency is going to be off. I'm going to perform probably pretty terribly compared to what I know I have the potential for. And then that's just going to drive a negative spiral or a negative association to training. So it's like, I think you need to set yourself up for success in this next month, this next 8 weeks, so that you can be really, really good. And I think, as you mentioned as well, the aerobic conditioning side of things is a perfect complement to that. I don't think like it doesn't have to be super like I'm just going to jump on a rower for 60 minutes and that's how I'm going to get it going, or like I'm just going to run 5Ks a day. But doing something at a sustainable pace is something that I think that we need to get better at consistently, because we all go, I'm just going to bury myself as hard as possible into this and that'll get me the results, versus I think a lot of us actually need to do more sustainable, repeatable work, even if that is at a little bit harder pace than your low intensity, but something you could go, okay, well, I'm going to do 5 rounds of this, and every round is going to be like a minute 30 per round each time, and I'm going to have a minute rest in between. That's a good quality session that you're going to get a lot of stimulus out of, but it's not going to bury you because you were able to do it at the same pace. So you know that you always had a little bit extra in the tank.
You just mentioned pacing there, which we're going to talk about that in one of the later points as well. So let's move on to actually, for the listeners who are going to a gym and they're going to do whatever the class is programmed and doesn't really have a say, I'm going to assume most gyms are going to take a similar approach to easing their members back in. I can't speak for all the gyms out there, but I would assume most gyms and most gym owners would ease people into it. So basically what we just spoke about then, that's, I think, on the board overall, most gyms are going to do that. So don't worry if you don't have a complete say in what you do. What you can control is how often you go and the other stuff like recovery and stuff, which we're going to go into now. That's what you should be kind of focused on as well. So let's move on to recovery, which is the next point which we need to focus on. Because we may have gone from not sitting around doing nothing, but we may have gone from not doing much movement or training to now the gyms are opened up. The potential for training stimulus is back to nearly the full capacity as before, with limitations in classes, but potentially you could do the same as what you did before, the same amount of days. Now, with recovery, because we're going to start training now, we need to focus on recovery even more. So that means calories. I would increase my calories going back to training. If you had still been training at home and still, say if you normally train 4 days a week and you have been training 4 days, you may not need to increase your calories very much. But if you're training at home as a lot of bodyweight stuff and maybe shorter, like maybe 20, 30 minutes workouts, and now you're going to go to the gym and do an hour workouts, you still may have to increase your calories just based on more calories burnt each day. So that's something that I would do, increase the calories, which is going to help with recovery as well, recovery is important. What else do we need to think about with recovery?
Well, I think just adding to that, like the other recommendation that I typically make around this time for people is I'm going to assume that most people are going to consistently still have a higher protein diet, even though like it is constantly something that we bring up. But if you're somewhere in that ballpark of like, let's say you're in that requisite range of like 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight, which general consensus is that's right around where you need to be to facilitate training, recovery, and then adaptation in that way there. But I think if you've been in a situation like myself in this time where I went from working in a gym, I was doing a lot of activity, to then training quite full on, to my training scaled back a little bit. I wasn't training as often or as long in those sessions. And then at the same time, I went to basically working at a desk. So my calories dropped quite significantly, and in particular, a lot from carbohydrates in that time because I wasn't doing a lot of neurally intensive stuff. So coming back in, I think it's a great recommendation to bring your carbohydrates up, particularly if you are going to do stuff that's progressively adding to your neural recovery demands. So I think that's a great thing to look at there. And then what other like consistent habits do you have around recovery that you need to bring back in now? Like obviously one big part of the recovery is like the workouts themselves. Are you having like more intensive days followed by like lower intensive days? And a good program will have that built in some degree, because you can't redline every day. And I think we've got past the point where we think that now. There was a point in time where people were like, oh, they're not pushing hard enough on the other days.
Intensity.
I think a lot of people have realized, okay, cool, we can maybe do like 2, maybe 3 very intensive days a week. Some other stuff that might be perceptually intensive, but not necessarily as physiologically demanding. So it might still feel hard, but it's not necessarily going to take 72 hours to recover from. And I think that a lot of great gyms are actually incorporating this into their program, but then you still need to top it up with stuff like your recovery practices, whether that's foam rolling, like myofascial release stuff. I know you mentioned off air, you're a big fan of like deep tissue, like massage work as well. I'm yet to find I need somebody. So if you have a recommendation, I'd love to hear who I should go see for that. But I think that's a big thing there. And then sleep, I think, is super important too. But a lot of people, I think, because they weren't getting up at 5 in the morning to get to the gym class, have actually got more sleep than what they did before.
Yeah, I think that I've heard of a lot of people. My routine didn't really change much, but I've heard a lot of people, and I'm not surprised, through this isolation and working from home, a lot of people are have gotten a lot more sleep than normal. And that's what a good thing about that is, a lot of people have now realized, oh, I feel so much better if I just had this much sleep. So why wasn't I doing this before? That's something that's really good, that has helped people realize, oh, I wasn't functioning at 100% when I thought I was before. Even if you train hard and your diet's on point, if you're missing sleep or if you're not getting enough of it, you're not going to be at that 100% everything, like mood, just memory, focused, everything. So I think a lot of people are going to focus more on sleep now after realizing how much better they feel from getting more sleep.
100%, man. You don't know how many fitness coaches that I've spoken to in the last few months about this point, being that fitness industry is typically like you work mornings and afternoons, so you're on split shifts, which means you're typically not getting to bed until late at night, but you're getting up very early in the morning, and you're go, go, go. You're trying to fit in like client sessions, your own training, your nutrition, because it's all super important to you. And all like, I feel like there's going to be like riots or like strikes amongst trainers going, we're not doing split shifts anymore because we realized how good sleep is.
Yeah. It's funny, hey?
Yeah.
So focusing on recovery is going to be really important. And also niggles. Like, you may have had some niggles that weren't really injuries, but you knew there was something like tight or something not right that used to maybe flare up when you trained. Over the last 12 weeks, all those niggles may be gone. Now, if you go back into training too quickly and too hard, those niggles may come straight back up. I would recommend, if you did have niggles and now you maybe still have them or maybe not, try and focus on keeping those niggles and injuries away, because a lot of people don't really care about the extra accessories to stay healthy or like mobility work, and then they get injured and then they think, fuck, why didn't I focus on this before I was injured? So we want to focus on preventing injuries before they happen. So being well recovered now, not training as much and having heaps more sleep, this is an opportunity where you are well recovered. So I would focus on preventing injuries now, adding that in, whether that's longer warm-ups, getting to the gym 10 minutes earlier to roll out, or focus on whatever's tight just to stay injury-free, because we're now injury-free, or hopefully we want to stay that way before you go in and wreck yourself and become injured. We don't want that. After having 12 weeks off, the last thing you want in the first week back is an injury to put you on the sideline for another 12 weeks.
Yeah, and I think to add to that too is like, obviously a lot of people go through like where they've rested a little bit more now. They might be feeling like they are not, or they don't have the injuries that they previously had been experiencing before. They then went from that point and they're like, cool, I can get back into the gym. My knees feel great for the first time in like 5 years. And then they come back in, they're like, all right, I'm going to start squatting. I'm going to do my lunges, like those sissy squats that always used to hurt me. I'm going for it. And then a week later, it pops back up. And sometimes, like some injuries, they do need the rest and the recovery. So some people, I think, are going to be fortunately feeling great for the end of it. But also some injuries, a lot of connective tissue stuff needs a little bit of loading too. So you might not be symptomatic at the moment, but the piece that's the cause behind that might not have been fixed. So this is where like it's a perfect opportunity. Is like if you come in and we start working on these, like you do your hypertrophy work properly, you make sure that you're respecting your tempo, your movement quality, doing your recovery work, you can probably get back on top of it where it doesn't pop back. But if you don't sort of respect the pieces that we're going through and we're talking about today, and you're like, all right, I'm back in the gym. Like I was talking to a guy last week about it, and he's like, man, I can't wait. Like World Gym's opening up on Saturday up at Maitland. I'm going up there. I'm going to be first through the door. I'm going to hit the biggest leg session that I've done in months. And he fortunately hasn't had any injury history or anything like that. But I was like, oh man, like, and he hadn't trained in that time. But I was like, you are going to be beaten up so badly for that. It's like, just do a like cruisy half an hour session. Like do some light squats and that. But he's like, I'm going to demolish my legs. I won't even be able to drive home.
Oh, funny. Yeah, so what about moving into mindset or habits? So what mindset have we got to build, or what our old mindset with training and the habits that we used to have, what do we need to consider about going back into now? So some of the things that come to mind are travel time. You might have had a 15-minute travel time to the gym every time you went, and then that's 15 minutes back. That's half an hour in your day that during the isolation, you've now got extra time in your day. So now when the gyms are opening back up, you're going to have to factor that in and remember, okay, now I've got to bring more stuff to work so that I can go straight to the gym afterwards. Or that might mean, all right, now I've got to start meal prepping my meals more because I have less time. So those habits we have to kind of build back in. Do you have any other examples?
Yeah, man, I think the biggest piece here is like, what are the habits that are the pieces of like supporting this healthy lifestyle that incorporates the gym as part of that relationship there and getting back into training? Because there's, as you said, it's like, do you train straight after work? Do you need to have all your stuff ready? In the last like 12 weeks, because you've been working from home, you've been able to wing it of like, cool, I feel like working out, I'll just go get changed and then go. And it doesn't matter if you take 15 minutes to find your shoes. But now you're on it, like, particularly if you're training in a place like here, or like a lot of the community gyms around that have a class schedule, is like you have to be organized, because one, you want to be timely. You don't want to be the last person turning up in the room and constantly walking in 3 minutes after everyone's already starting the warm up. And these are pieces that factor into the injuries and the niggles and that sort of stuff, is like skipping out on the little things. It's like, what are the little things that are going to contribute to your success over the coming months, rather than how can we just like jump straight back into it and make it work? And I think some of the habits of people who are successful is like being timely, being consistent with preparing things. Like they prepare themselves to succeed. They're doing the little things. Like one of the habits that we're trying to bring into the gym now, particularly in this time, is doing a daily readiness test, which is part of their program. So it's the first thing that they tab into. We have virtually like a score, 5 things scored out of 5, and based off their score, we can kind of go, okay, you need to scale things back today.
Huh.
But or potentially if their score is really, really low, it's like, dude, you're not training today. This is just going to bury you, and it's not worth it. But that's something that we're trying to build in as a new positive habit, because it's going to help us, one, deliver a better service for us, but two, it's also going to help teach our clients how to understand their body better and be able to make those decisions themselves of going, okay, cool, like I scored, and we're going to dial these numbers, but I scored 15 out of 25, which is just on the borderline of, okay, cool, I can probably go okay, but I know that I'm not at 100%. So I might not have to scale too much, but I just have to be respectful of my body at this point. If I score like 8, I'm like, dude, like I need to slow down today. Today's not we're meant to go heavy on squats today. Not for you today, man. You go and go for a walk. So I think it's a really, really good thing of like, how can we create these little habits to educate for us, it's how can we help set up ones to educate our clients on how they can make decisions for themselves surrounding training. But then for you, if you're listening, it might be how can you be able to build the skills and the habits that are going to help lead to your success and a better understanding of your own body. I know you use the Whoop wristband that has stuff like HRV and that sort of thing, right?
Yep.
Like, so maybe you need to invest in something. Like I just use a cheap Fitbit to just monitor as like, cool, am I getting my steps in? Am I reasonably active? But you could invest in something like Whoop to help educate you in this process of going, okay, well, like what are the trends here? Like, man, I'm always buried on Thursday because I went flat out Monday to Wednesday, and then I just don't want to train. Like how can I work this out to engage in this lifestyle?
Yeah, Whoop is a great tool to have a deeper understanding of your own body's recovery, because without a fitness tracker or any sort of anything, you're kind of just guesswork. And I do think it's great to be able to learn about your body, and the longer you go on your training journey, I guess, the more you learn about your body. And there is definitely, like, everyone should know how they feel, like how hard they should go in the gym based off how they feel. Or people should know, like, okay, I've got this all coming up, like this training, or like I'm having a big weekend. I'm going to have alcohol. I'm not going to have the best sleep. I might dial back my training a few days just so that I'm not so buried on Sunday or Monday. It's awesome to have a knowledge of that, but having this tool like the Whoop just helps you kind of refine that. And all the guesswork that you've been doing, you can actually see if that guesswork is right. Or you can say, like, I think based off my week, I don't think I'm going to be well recovered tomorrow or whatever, and that might be correct. And so that might start to, help you kind of make your guesswork even better so that you can understand your body even better.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's move on to expectations with training. So starting back into the gym, what expectations do we need to have on ourselves? The first one is total volume. You should not expect to be able to fit in the same amount of workouts or the same total volume in a week as previously. Now, this is going to depend on how much you did train in isolation, but nearly everyone will not be at the same level as before. So I can't stress this enough. This is like, there's a high chance of injury here right now because you're not used to doing so much. So if you go straight back into your old routine and the same amount of days and intensity as before, there is a much higher risk for an injury here. So total volume. Pacing as well, I think. I think just you've probably lost some fitness training at home or whatever training you have done. Probably not as fit as you were before. So with pacing, you might look at a workout and think, okay, I should be able to say maybe there's a 1,000-meter row among other things. And you might think, okay, usually in a workout like this, I'll jump on the rower and I'll be able to hold a minute 45 per 500-meter pace. Don't expect to be at that same fitness level going into it. So I would look at that and think, okay, if I could normally have sat at this pace, I'll maybe go a little bit slower. I might sit at a minute 50 or a minute 55 and try and hold that and see if that was enough, or you might have to halfway through drop back your pace again because you are not as fit as before. Things like things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a key thing there, and you probably can get away with doing it like at first, and it might not feel that bad, but it's gonna cost more accumulatively with it. So
like throughout the week.
Maybe throughout the week, but within that same session.
Yeah.
So like if you've got, say, 5 rounds of that 1,000-meter row built in with some things, that's probably a pretty big session. You shouldn't be jumping into that straight away. But say you've got a few of them and you're like, oh, cool, I can hold the minute 45. Like, I'm feeling okay. And you get through the first one, but then the next one you start tanking hard. And this is what we were talking about earlier. It was like focusing on a little bit more of a sustainable aerobic pace. Even though it might be hard, it should be something you should be able to repeat consistently through it. And I think we can get tricked sometimes into sometimes it's in situations like now, sometimes it's just when you're a little bit more fried and you've got an accumulation of work that you've done in that week that you can still get the job done to get it started, but it just costs so much more adrenally and fatiguing wise to keep up to that pace. And I think like in terms of like from a physiological standpoint, we're talking about like between like what your anaerobic capacity or your aerobic capacity is, and then when you can dip into that anaerobic speed reserve or like your anaerobic capacity to on top of that to just get you home. And the more that you start dipping into that, the more it's going to bury you from the back end of it. And the more fatigued you are, the more you might need to dip into that to keep that same pace if that's the expectation. But for right now, it's like it's all the records are off the table. Like you don't have to look at what you used to do. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like comparing yourself to 12 weeks ago right now is probably not the best way to plan your training or to approach your training. Maybe in 3 months' time, once you've built this base back, then you can compare to where you were pre-COVID and go, cool, I used to be able to do a minute 45 on this and hold it. Like maybe I'll go back to that. I'll try to keep on holding there again. But you've built that base back and you'll have started to get a bit of a rhythm. You've probably built these consistent habits surrounding training again, that everything's starting to fall into place. And it's okay to like maybe once you've got that back to start comparing to that somewhat peaked like training all the time version of yourself, but comparing like I don't want to touch some of the things that I've done previously, like some of the heavy stones and things like that. Is like, I'm not game to even touch them now because I know how bad I'm going to be. So
Yeah.
instead of trying to keep up to that and like hurting myself, it's like, I'm just going to like build my way back in before I even go and touch them. I think that's the biggest thing. And like, not having the expectation that you need to hit PRs. Like, I was talking to a guy the other day, and he's like, I'm going to try for my deadlift PR. And he's had the luxury of having a pretty good gym, but I don't think he's trained. He would say himself that he hadn't trained with the same intent that he had prior to it, but he still had the equipment. He was still able to train. He's like, I'm going to go for my deadlift PR. I'm like, okay, dude, like, if you really need to, like, you're probably the best prepared out of anyone that I know to give it a crack, but as well, don't be so let down if it doesn't happen. Like, you've been training by yourself versus in a supportive, like, driving community in those sessions. So it's okay to not be exactly where you were, and you're probably the rest is probably going to be good for a lot of people too, that they've had to be able to actually get back to a new baseline to build upon. Because I think some people probably, and I would be included in that, like, get to a point where you've trained so much that it's like you're more so just like, your training's just holding on to normal instead of like you actually progressing and moving forward in some phases. So I think it's a good thing for us to have had this rest and go, cool, now let's reset and let's build our way back up. And I think a lot of people are going to find new peaks in their fitness.
I think potentially that as well. I think a lot of people having forced 12-ish weeks of like less intensity and kind of forced recovery and potentially better sleep, I think a lot of people are going to, like you said, have some new PBs, not straight away, which, like you said, I would not expect to or try to hit any sort of PB in this first 4 weeks, I don't think. But yeah, potentially. And I think having the expectations of, slowly building in these old habits, like our meal prepping and just stuff like that, having the expectations of, okay, my first week back, all my old habits, they may not be set yet. So I may miss some meals, or I may, not hit all my mobility or everything that I want to hit, just because it takes a while to build habit and repeat it enough times so that it does become a habit.
100%, man.
But yeah, all right, that's all we've got time for, but let's quickly rehash over the points. So, goals. Have they changed? Are they the same? What are our new training goals? Training. What type of training are we going to jump back into? Is it going to be the same as before? Potentially something lower intensity and easing back into it. Recovery. Focusing on recovery, adding in some calories, focusing on mobility, making sure we have good quality sleep. Mindset and habits, building back that mindset that we used to have and building in those habits that we had. And then expectations around training and our goals and expectations on how we're going to perform and stuff like that. Yeah, sweet. I think we've covered everything. So we've got to wrap things up. Where do you want to send the listeners to find out more? I know this is our second podcast together. I mentioned at the start the other episode that we did together, but where can the listeners find you?
Mate, you can find me at Jacob Hodson on Instagram or at New Strength HQ, but really probably the best place at the moment is the Facebook group, the Newy Health Hub. We've both been contributing in that, and we're just really, really trying to build the community up within the local fitness area, and then also give people access to the best content, whether it be stuff like this podcast that you've been doing and some of the information you put out there, or some of the stuff that we're doing, and then also sharing a lot of the great stuff from other local fitness professionals too. So I think that's a great place to search out for that one on Facebook. That's the Newy Health Hub. And yeah, that'll be it. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, it's been awesome, bro. All right, guys. If you enjoyed this, please take a screenshot and share it. I'd love to see who's listening. And also, please subscribe and give a rating on iTunes. Sending positive vibes to everyone out there. Thanks heaps for listening.